Let's bring in Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who is a former advisor to the president, former Breitbart News national security editor. He's a current Fox News contributor, author of Why We Fight, Recovering America's Will to Win. Dr. G, good morning. First off, give me your reflections, your 30,000-foot view on what's transpired today and yesterday at this NATO summit.
I think we've seen the death of business as usual and the standard protocol approach to these events. I actually cut my teeth more than 20 years ago on NATO issues. I was a fellow at the NATO Defense College in Rome, and we've had an alliance, the most successful one in modern history, suffer for about 30 years from what is called the freeloader complex, whereby most of the members of the club simply didn't pay their dues, weren't serious about their membership in NATO, and that has ended. We have an American president who hasn't just worried about this issue, but has said front and center, you guys need to pull your weight. This organization needs to be relevant, and he does it on camera. And then, you got to doff your cap to what he did with regards to Germany. Germany has been in bed with Russia for years. The sheer fact that you have a former German chancellor, the equivalent of the head of the executive government, Gerhard Schröder, become a leading executive of the national energy company in Russia, Gazprom, and they're about to ink a deal whereby 70% of their energy would come from Russia, and at the same time they're complaining about Russia. It's cognitive dissonance of the highest order, and the president called them out on it. So it's throwing the cat amongst the pigeons, but it had to be done, and then it's going to be on to UK and Finland.
Yeah, and for some reason, Dr. G, we're seeing the media try to actually call out the president, say that the president handled this improperly, that it is not good to put pressure on our allies like this, that the president's language, and some of it's pretty over the top. He said that Germany is totally controlled by Russia. CNN described this as an attack on Russia, on Germany's sovereignty. Do you believe that's what the president was doing?
No, of course not. The very simple bumper sticker for what he did is he's saying to all of them, doesn't matter who you are, whether it's Canada with your 270% tariffs on American dairy products, or whether it's Germany getting bed with Russia. His message has always been: if you call yourself our friend, if you're using the word ally, act like it. That's all he's doing. And, for all those people who said, oh, he wants to destroy NATO, garbage. He wants to make it relevant. He wants to strengthen it, and he wants them to wake up to the idea that helping Putin doesn't actually make you stronger. It's the reapplication of common sense to international relations and the relations between people who should be friends, but who really aren't acting like it.
Yeah, and Dr. G, a topic that comes up frequently, so forgive me for mentioning it again, but I still think it's necessary because this has been the obsession of the left during this presidency, among their other obsessions. But the one that sticks out, of course, is that Russia colluded with Trump, and Trump might even be a puppet of Russia. I'm still seeing this repeated. Again, you have to wonder why folks like you were brought into the White House when you were national security editor for Breitbart. Breitbart's never been sympathetic to Russia in the slightest. We've been very tough on Russia. We continue to be tough on Russia. So is it? Are we Trump Bart, or is Trump a Russia stooge? It does not add up, and yet I've been criticized publicly for not covering Russia enough at Breitbart. And then you see what happens where the president is using Russia as an example of why Germany is subservient to Russia as a negative, which is an attack not just on Germany, it's an attack on Russia as well. It is tough talk against Russia, suggesting it is bad to be dependent on Russia. That is the implication here. So how does the left square the circle that Trump, according to Jonathan Chait and MSNBC, might in fact be a Russian intel agent? That theory was floated this week, that he might be an agent of Russian intelligence. How do they square that with the fact that he is publicly on the international stage throwing down against Russia?
Alex, you're committing the first sin of what I call the intelligence analysis. You're mirror imaging. You're trying to apply reality and common sense to the question. They don't need to square it. This isn't about, you only have to square things if you're interested in the truth. And these people aren't interested in the truth. This insane person who wrote the article in the New York, New York Magazine, I saw the interview with him, and he said, well, I don't have the evidence, but it could be. Well, my dear friend, you could be beating your wife right now. You could be, abusing little children. I don't have any evidence, but it could be. It's all about narrative, and this is what this is why the left is in such a disturbing place right now, because there are no pragmatists left. The insanity is free range. It's unhinged. It's roaming freely. And I was never a fan of Bill Clinton, but at least in prior eras, there were the people on the left in positions of power who could rein in the crazies on the left. And now it's not happening. Now it is being mainstreamed. The idea that this woman, Cortez, who won the Democrat primary in New York, that when she gives an interview on national television where she's talking about the DHS black sites on the border, and nobody has an issue with that statement, well then they've just jumped the shark in ways that just are unimaginable just a few years ago. So who is the pragmatist now on the left, Alex, who's going to rein these people in? I don't see it. And that's how you have Antifa. That's how you have the attack on Steve Scalise. That's how you have a 30-year-old guy who's 200 pounds assault a 16-year-old kid because he's wearing a MAGA hat. The left is out of control.
Yeah, they're out of control, and this is why we have our rap sheet that John Nolte is updating daily with 350 examples so far and counting, and we're adding, it seems like dozens a day of harassment, incitement, and violence against Trump supporters, largely for no good reason. Okay, so let's, Dr. G, going back to NATO, just to reset, and again, these have been important shows, and there's so much news breaking, and I recommend that getting the shows on demand commercial free. I broke down a lot of the details, but here's the truth. United States is paying anywhere from 70 to 90% of spending on defense for NATO, and that's really, it only starts there. It's not even just about spending. There's more to it than that. He's demanding people pay their fair share. Their commitments are at least 2%. Only a handful of nations get there. Germany cannot afford it because they've got a huge welfare state. They've got a huge migration problem, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on, and they just don't want to pay it because they're globalists and they're not into this stuff. And so the president is saying they just got to pay their fair share. He claims that he got commitments from just about everyone in NATO that they are going to pay their fair share on a timetable they're going to build up over a few years. They're accelerating their previous timetables to get to their fair commitment. And now Emmanuel Macron is denying it. He's trying to deny the president this victory. What's the truth here? What's going on?
Well, given what's happened in the past, I think there clearly is a separation between what was agreed upon in private behind closed doors and what these people have to say in public because of domestic pressure. So, look, these individuals know the gig is up. The idea, I remember it very clearly. It was Merkel's first visit to the U.S., and she was in the White House, and she was with her national security advisor. And we had to, she was talking about how serious Germany is about defense, and don't worry. And we had to make the point to her that purely the increment by which the Trump administration is increasing the U.S. defense budget, just the increase amount, is larger than the whole defense budget of Germany. And we said, so how serious are you? These people have been playing games. When those nations who say, oh, yeah, we're doing the 2%, even in those cases, there are several nations that are listing military pensions as part of that 2% of GDP committed to defense. That's not serious. If you look at what America is doing in terms of rebuilding its military capacity to deal with a resurgent militaristic China, to deal with Iran, to deal with the threat of Russia. Remember, Crimea is still an illegally annexed part of the Russian Federation. That's what NATO has to deal with, that kind of very clear and present danger. So I'm sure, the president is truthful in what he said with regards to the pressure he exerted and the response that was, pressured out of his interlocutors. But of course, once, they're posing in front of the cameras, they're going to say what needs to be heard back home, because, Alex, the swamp isn't just an American phenomenon. The swamp exists on the other side of the Atlantic as well.
Yeah, and it exists at a worse level because they're utterly so secular that it's just so pervasive, those swamp values, and they really do have this sort of globalist world government utopian fantasy, and they're not going to get there, Dr. G. That is the joke that they're not getting. So one thing that's interesting is that they're going to act as though this is a surprise, that the president's being too aggressive, he's going rogue, but this is exactly what he campaigned on, and this is exactly what we knew coming into the 2016 election. I'm actually reading an old article you wrote for us at Breitbart News 2 years ago, where you quote the president saying many NATO nations are not making payments, are not making what they're supposed to make. That's a big thing. You can't say forget that. And he's calling out these NATO. He said this to the New York Times. Everyone knew this was coming. How are people acting as though this is a shock? It is the least shocking thing that's going on in the news right now.
Yeah, I know it's so unusual to have somebody who's a politician keep his promises, but it doesn't matter whether it's NATO and what he said during the campaign and the fact that he's doing exactly what he promised during the campaign now as president. Pick an issue. Pick NAFTA. Pick the rise of China. Donald Trump has been saying what he's been saying about the key issues that are his policy platforms for more than 20 years. Go back and look at his Oprah interview. Look at any interview he's given on these issues in the last 25 years. He's been on a course. He says the international system is bust. It exploits the United States. The idea that we give nations like China most favored nation status and help them gain entry into the World Trade Organization when they have an overt plan to displace us in the world and undermine us. How is that logical? The only people who could say that's a good thing are members of the policy elite that have failed America since about the end of the Cold War. Pick an issue, and I think this is going to have to be, my next book, Alex. Pick a big issue in national security and foreign policy from the last 30 years where the elite, quote unquote, the elite got it right, whether it was Iraq, whether it was international trade, whether it was Russia. They always got it wrong. And the president is like the little boy who says, look, the emperor's naked, and I'm going to fix this insanity. And that's what he's doing.
All right, let's take a call or two for Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Let's talk to George in Oklahoma at line 4. Welcome to the show. You're on with Alex and Dr. G.
Morning, Alex. Morning, Dr. Gorka. Hey, I don't, at the risk of spreading fake news, this is, it's not verified or anything. I read this off of a news source a few days ago, and I don't even remember where I read it from, but maybe you can verify this, Alex. During a recent NATO exercise, the German army were using broomsticks. I don't know if that's, again, I don't want to spread fake news, but would you be able to verify that?
Yeah, well, this was reported by the UK Independent, which is a left-wing paper, but they kind of got it from this source called The Local, which is not always entirely reliable, but it was parroted by establishment media in Europe. The UK Telegraph did it as well, which is a highly reputable paper. So they reported exactly what you said, that they use broomsticks. And they painted them black to resemble guns for NATO drills. So, Dr. G, well, why would you do that? Can there possibly be a justification for that?
Oh, my Lord, I really don't know. Anything is possible in, as you said, in a European Union that is driven by ideology and not the interests of the people that they're supposed to serve. Who knows? I can't verify the story. Of course, you knew exactly where it was from and what the sources were. But in the insanity that is the utopianism of Europe today, anything is possible.
George, any response?
No, I just, I didn't want to spread fake news, and I wasn't quite sure, but I had read that, and I just wanted to run it by you. And
as far as I know, it's true,
Dr. Gorka.
Thanks, George. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for the call. And it is an honor to speak with Dr. Gorka, one of the braver guys out there in modern media. So, Dr. G, a couple other quick topics I want to mention with you. One of the most fascinating and popular stories of Breitbart News yesterday was this rescue ship was pirated in the Mediterranean yesterday. African migrants, I'm reading from Virginia Hale at Breitbart London, African migrants who thought they would be denied passage to Europe became violent and threatened to kill the crew of an Italian supply ship that had rescued them. And they basically hijacked and pirated this ship that was designed to rescue them as they tried to migrate from Africa and become refugees into the EU. And this is the humanitarian element of the migrant crisis that we've been reporting at Breitbart since at least 2014 on both sides of the pond. It's the same exact thing happens here in the United States. These things tend to follow a pattern. Again, this is not one I read a lot in the establishment media, but these migrants who last I told were all supposed to be Rhodes Scholars, they are actually pirated a rescue ship. Is there something that is more emblematic of how off the rails the migrant crisis has gotten, really in America and in the EU?
It's the perfect summary. It embodies, again, this complete disjuncture between reality and the narrative of the elite and the narrative of the media. What we're being told day in, day out is, oh, they're poor asylum seekers. They're here because they die back home. We have to help them. And then we find out that they're acting like modern-day Barbary pirates. It tells you everything you need to know. And you're absolutely right, Alex. The connection between what's going on the Mediterranean and the concept of the wall and why Donald Trump got elected, all of these things are connected. The elite still denies the connective tissue between Brexit and Donald Trump becoming president. These are all intertwined. And it's not populism. I don't even like the word populism because it has been given this pejorative spin in the last few years. It is the reassertion of national sovereignty. It's the reassertion of representative politics. When people in the UK say, we don't want faceless bureaucrats in Brussels telling us how many immigrants we have to accept, when we have, I saw it myself, blue-collar workers of the Steel Valley in Ohio vote for a billionaire real estate magnate from New York, politics has changed forever. So yes, that story is completely emblematic of why we have Donald Trump as president, why Brexit happened, why the Conservatives have won in Austria, Italy, and Hungary, and why this is a movement that will keep on growing.
Okay, so Dr. G, one other thing which is less fortunate is there are some reports of at least somewhat of a ISIS resurgence in Iraq right now. Iraq, of course, is totally sort of become a disaster since Barack Obama's precipitous pullout. If people want to know, just to make a long story short, I was a supporter of the Iraq War when I was much younger. I think it was in college or high school at the time. I kind of bought the George W. Bush Kool-Aid on that one. I since no longer think that was a smart move. Again, but who could take, I was 16 years old. You can't really take yourself seriously at that point. But I also think that for some reason, thanks to the surge, we were able to somehow get ourselves in a position to, in an unlikely way, win the Iraq War. And then Barack Obama just pulls us out precipitously, which was a equally bad decision as getting in there in the first place. And we left essentially a vacuum that ISIS, of course, has filled. President Trump has beaten back ISIS in a terrific way, along with our allies there. And then now we are seeing Iraqi troops are struggling to fight back against this apparent resurgence of ISIS, according to our own Edwin Moore. This is troubling, Dr. G. Do you have any insider detail into this?
Yeah, your analysis is spot on with regards to what happened there in the last 20 years. We mustn't take our eye off the ball just because the caliphate of ISIS has been destroyed by U.S. troops and local partners doesn't mean that the war against what I call the global jihadi movement has been won. Iraq doesn't function as a Westphalian nation state, at least not at the moment. And that's why, for example, this ties straight back into our first topic. This is why what the president is doing in Brussels at the NATO summit is so incredibly important. These are not issues of just Iraq. He's not interested in nation building, but they're not irrelevant to us just because they're happening 8,000 miles away in Mesopotamia. So NATO nations have to get serious with regard to the counterterrorism campaign that is a global one, not because we want a nation build, but because we want to destroy organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And the war in Iraq is not over. Iran is still very active on the ground. The president understands the threat. But again, let's be optimistic here. It is quite stunning to remind ourselves that this man has only been commander-in-chief for less than 18 months.
Yeah, so my thought here is this is bad news, but the thing is that ISIS has been so decimated that I don't want to be overly outraged or hysterical over this because, I mean, they're only a fraction of what they were, but we still need to keep an eye on some of these things. And it does tie nicely into this discussion geopolitically about our allies and trying to make the world a safer place and not having the United States be put in a position, as we have been so often over the past century, to be honest with you, of being the world's policeman. None of us want that, Dr. G, and we've seen that it's impossible to do that perfectly.
No, and right now we have a president who doesn't want to do that. And, I know this might be a subtlety that doesn't come across for the majority of the swamp, but there's a big difference between being the world's policeman and wanting a world in which our partners are sovereign, are healthy, and who we can work with together. That's what this president wishes to achieve because he believes that sovereign nations are good for the world. And that's the Trump phenomena, that's Brexit. But it's not about nation building and it's not about imposing our writ upon other nations. But if you're in a group like NATO, it's time to get serious, time to pay your membership dues, and it's time to act as if you really are an ally of the United States. And to use that great motto from the Marine Corps, no better friend, no worse enemy. That's America under the Trump administration.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Dr. Sebastian Gorka, former deputy assistant to the president and former national security editor for Breitbart. You'll see him on Fox News a lot, but you can pre-order the book, Why We Fight, Recovering America's Will to Win. And I always enjoy speaking to him every week at this time. Catch you next week, Dr. G.
Thanks, Alex. God bless you and the listeners.